Good morning. It's good to see all you guys this morning. I wanted to, we're in the series One Hit Wonders, right? And we kind of did a little music trivia quiz last Sunday in case you weren't here. And we're going to do one again in a moment. Tried to make a Tulsa joke about Hanson being one hit wonders. The church has lovingly communicated with me their difference of opinion. So I apologize. Let's go with round two. First picture. I'm just kidding. She's not a one-hit wonder. I was just going to see if you're going to get mad at me about Tulsa jokes again. All right, let's try another one. Do you remember his big song? And y'all, I know he gave us Hannah Montana. We're thankful for that. But when it comes to his musical talents, he had one song. Achy, Breaky Heart. Also, all of you guys out there who are rocking this haircut today, you're not original. Billy Ray gave it. Okay, there he is. All right, next one. Do you remember? Yeah. What was it? Call Me Maybe, okay. Okay, if you're over 35, you're not getting at all. All right. Okay, next one. Huh? Possibly the worst band name ever. Here's the song. A lot going on right there. All right, next one. Do you got this one? Okay, let's see what it was. Walking on Sunshine. You know that song, don't you? You just didn't know. This is my point. When you're a one-hit wonder, you can know the song and never know the band. All right, next one. I'm almost sure you're going to know this song. All right, let's see what it is. Huh? Okay, last one. If you have been to a wedding, if you have been to a high school dance, you have seen the Cupid Shuffle, okay? Or you have not seen, but you probably have seen like the whole dance and the whole thing, right? So there you go. There's this week's edition of the One Hit Wonders. We'll play one more round next week as well. I'm open to your input on what I think I should share. So sometimes one-hit wonders are mocked, aren't they? They get made fun of. People make jokes. There's misunderstandings about their talent level. And I want you to keep that in mind this morning as we talk about our one-hit wonder from the Bible. I even remember the guys from the band that sang Breakfast at Tiffany's. They said they got tired of only getting to talk about one song. And so they felt like they weren't appreciated for who they were. There's a lot of misunderstandings along the way. And I want you to keep that word in mind, misunderstanding, as we talk about our one-hit wonder today, and her name is Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene, Luke chapter 8, verse 1 and 2. What an amazing woman this is. I have thoroughly enjoyed. I've taught about her before, but I went a whole nother deep dive this week and just got into it. And so I hope you're blessed by this woman's life. Luke chapter 8, verse 1. He took his 12 disciples with him, along with some women. Among them was Mary Magdalene. She was clearly one of Jesus' closest friends and closest followers. Mary, sometimes called Mary Magdalene because she was likely from this booming fish town that was on the western shore of Galilee by the name of Magdala. And so that's kind of like a shout out to her hometown. Mary's name can also mean obstinate or rebellious. Her name is also connected to the name of Miriam, who was the older sister of Moses and the prophetess of Israel. And Mary, by the way, was the name of about 25% of women in ancient Judea. 1 in 4 women shared the name of Mary. We get confused in the Bible about which Mary is who, right? And so it stands to reason that that's what's going on here. But so what do we take away from this beautiful life of this woman, Mary of Magdala? The first thing is this. Mary Magdalene was healed by Jesus as a fulfillment of prophecy. Luke chapter 8, verse 1, as Jesus traveled about from one town and village to another, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God, the 12 were with him, and also some women who'd been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had come out, Joanna, the wife of Chuza, who was the manager of Herod's household, and Susanna, among many others. And these women were helping to support them out by their own means. 7 spirits. This is what Mary had inhabiting her soul. Even one spirit in New Testament times that was evil could ruin a person's life. All this was suggesting was that at some point, Mary's life was wrecked by her spiritual, emotional, physical condition. She was completely at the bottom. She was a lost cause. And what's interesting to me is we don't know how long she suffered. But many of you in this room have suffered from something chronic. Am I right? Maybe it's nausea from that last chemo treatment. Can't seem to shake it. Maybe one of my best friends right now has shingles, and he's miserable. It's like he's a month and a half into it and still in a lot of pain. A broken bone that is slow to heal. My sweet wife currently has a broken arm. It's slow to heal. Vertigo, infertility, depression. You understand what it's like to not improve. You understand that. It is a beat down. It's interesting, though, that we only read one line in the Bible about Mary being cleansed of 7 demons. I mean, why do they even include it at all? It almost feels like a throwaway line. And here's why it's included: to show that the Messiah was fulfilling predictions about him from the Old Testament. Isaiah 53, verse 4, surely he took up our pain and our suffering. This is what he did for Mary. Isaiah 61, verse 1, the Spirit of the sovereign Lord is upon me, for the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He sent me to comfort the brokenhearted and to proclaim that captives will be released and prisoners will be freed. See, Mary was a living testimony to the messianic predictions coming true in the person of Jesus. That he does, in fact, pick up our pain and suffering, and that there is good news for the broken and for the captives. The second thing that we can take from Mary's life is this, that she was a committed student of Jesus. So it says in the scriptures that she traveled from town to town with the 12, she and a few women, and they learned from watching Jesus. They learned from listening to him teach in small group settings and in large crowds. Having a woman, though, in his traveling group, Jesus was well outside the social norms of his day. That was just not a thing to have men and women traveling together, but it was a thing for Jesus. And I love how he holds space for all who deeply long to follow him. There's always an extra spot with him, isn't there? Fit in with me. I'm here for it. The third thing is this. Mary Magdalene generously cared for Jesus. So in Luke chapter 8, it notes that Mary had suffered greatly before meeting Jesus, but subsequently, she served as the manager of the group's money. Like she and Joanna took care of the group's money. And by the way, Luke has more references to jobs that women played in his ministry, in Jesus' ministry, than any other gospel. He mentions several of them by name. In Luke chapter 8, verse 1, we see he talks about Mary, he talks about Joanna, he talks about Susanna, right? And other women were part of that traveling group. And those 3 women that I mentioned right there, they come from a wide array of backgrounds. Those people who walked those years with Jesus were not coming out of the same molds. Joanna is a woman of prominence. Her husband managed Herod's house. Herod, like the arch enemy of Jesus' ministry, right? But the figurehead king of Judea inside of the Roman Empire. She was deeply connected and I'm sure quite wealthy. And then there's Mary Magdalene, who I'm sure once she started to deal with the mental illness, with the demons that were inhabiting her soul, she would become a social outcast. And even upon healing, isn't there kind of a suspicion of a person like that? And so she would have certainly been an outsider trying to look in, but not to Jesus, see? All of them were in his inner circle. And Mary wasn't patronized by Jesus. It wasn't like, oh, she's had a really tough life. We're going to give her a job. Let's have her manage all of our money, of which we have very little. They're not going to give her that job as just a pat on the back. She wasn't the apostles' mascot. She was right in the middle of Jesus' work. And so when these women come to faith, they brought their finances with them, which enabled Jesus to continue his ministry, right? And perhaps Mary was a little bit older. Perhaps she'd accumulated some wealth through a deceased husband or years of working in that very wealthy town of Magdalene. Either way, her money was given to Jesus and to the apostles freely. Broken backstories, gender, socioeconomics did not eliminate a person from Jesus' inner circle. And by the way, this wasn't a one-time financial gift from Mary. She provided the group financially on an ongoing basis. Generosity was a tangible expression of Mary's faith. And isn't it so cool how God, in all of his options to provide money for the ministry of Jesus to spread throughout the land, isn't it cool how he included these women in the work? So let's appreciate how special this unique team was. As you truly and deeply receive it, your heart becomes grateful for the grace you've been given. Your giving is more generous. You would look at Mary, her faith became tangible through sharing her resources over and over again. At the end of the story, she's the one who brought expensive spices to anoint Jesus' body for burial. She was giving all the way through. So consider that. And the fourth thing I want you to think about is this. Mary Magdalene has been misunderstood and misrepresented for centuries. Now, some of y'all may not be aware of this, but I think many of you will be. As powerful as Mary's story of healing and presence and generosity and faith and deep devotion to Jesus are, she has another lesson to teach us. It's a lesson that Mary herself would not have even been aware of, as it happened long after she had passed away. Did you know that Mary Magdalene has been confused and misunderstood, misrepresented for literally centuries? Are you aware of this? I want you to look at this next painting right here. This is by an artist named Titian, and it's known as the Penitent Mary Magdalene. It was painted in 1531 in the height of the Italian Renaissance. You look at Mary, and she has a complicated look, to say the least. It is at once, and it's supposed to be a sensuous look, but also a sad and broken and repentant look. She is partially unclothed, yet she is holding a Bible while she looks heavenward with tears in her eyes. I want you to think about what's going on there. See, Titian mistakenly believed that Mary was a redeemed prostitute. At some point in your life, have you heard this? If you've been a Christian for a while, you've heard that Mary was a prostitute. Many others have believed this, and it's not just 500 years ago when he painted it, but the idea was entrenched in an article by Valdez Quaid in 2014 in a magazine, also in a 2016 movie called Risen, or we could go back to Dan Brown, who wrote that book, The Da Vinci Code. He was promoting that idea too. And so he was trying to create intrigue and conspiracy regarding Mary Magdalene and Jesus and the Catholic Church. And as a result now, many believers mistakenly believe something like this about Mary Magdalene. They believe that she's a former prostitute, or that she's the adulteress that Jesus saved from stoning, or that she's the girl that just grew up in that tough part of Judea, or they think she's the one with the alabaster jar. Or people just say, oh, don't ask me, I'm not a Mary, I'm more of a Martha. Like, she was none of those people and none of those things. So how did it happen? So the confusion started way back, you guys. Pope Gregory created the misrepresentation in his sermon in 591 AD. Now, how do you think that feels to a guy who gets up in front of people to speak on a regular basis? That I could potentially create a disaster that lasts for 1,400 years through my ridiculous words. Listen to what Pope Gregory said. I'll just word for word. She whom Luke calls the sinful woman, whom John calls Mary of Bethany, we believe to be the Mary from whom 7 devils were ejected according to Mark. And what did these 7 devils signify, catch this, if not all the vices? It's clear, brothers, that the woman previously used the ointment to perfume her flesh in forbidden acts. What she therefore displayed more scandalously, as you think about that picture you just saw a moment ago, she was now offering to God in a more praiseworthy manner. So partially clothed, but still holding the Bible. She turned the mass of her crimes into virtues to serve God entirely in penance. And in one paragraph, Pope Gregory sealed Mary's false reputation as a person who sinned in every imaginable way. And he did it through this real carelessly concocted casserole of Bible characters. So Mary, she's thought of as a prostitute, and she's a mess, according to the Pope. So Richard Hooper mocked Pope Gregory's, what we would call like a conglomerate of Marys with this equation. He said, okay, so this is how the Pope did it. Jesus' feet plus ointment plus hair plus Mary of Magdalene plus the sinful woman from Luke chapter 7 equals Mary Magdalene, the prostitute. And so with this sealed reputation that was false, Mary Magdalene has lived with this for 1,400 years. And by the way, the reason why a lot of this gets misrepresented is because the Catholic Church used to commission art to tell doctrine and to teach stories through artwork, especially to people who were illiterate. So Titian was taking his inspiration from Pope Gregory's sermon 1,000 years later. Now, here's the deal. I don't want to be super duper hard on Pope Gregory because, again, 25% of women were named Mary. Gregory didn't have Google. He didn't have searchable Bible software. And throw in the fact that Magdala kind of had a bad reputation as too much money and too much sin. And so you put all that together, and that's kind of where he came up with the idea. But I don't think we believe that just because you live in a town with money and bad habits, everybody's bad. I mean, Amsterdam's not all bad. Las Vegas, not all bad. Of course, things happen there that we're not okay with. The good news, the Catholic Church apologized for their 1,000-year role in teaching poorly about Mary's character. The bad news, they knew the truth about Mary for 400 years before they admitted the mistake. Now, I understand that Mary wasn't alive for the misunderstanding, but 400 years, y'all, that's a lot of hubris, isn't it? To know you're wrong and be so prideful that you can't admit it. Pope John Paul II later spoke of the dignity and calling of women in restoring Mary's reputation. He even called her an apostle of the apostles, which is actually how she was often known to the early church, because that word apostle just means one sent with a special message. And so you needed to have seen the resurrected Jesus to have the message. And so as Mary walked those roads with those 12, she was able to share in that message. But a 1,400-year knot of misinformation does not come undone quickly. Maybe you saw Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ. Maybe Scorsese's Last Temptation of Christ. They continue to put forward this terrible idea that Mary was adulterous. And there's crazier theories that go from there. None of them true. But the rumors persist. So that's the next thing I want you to think about. Mary Magdalene's true character stays resilient through rumors, lies, and untruths. When you live your life in a simple way, with integrity, with goodness in your motives, eventually your true colors emerge. Sometimes, centuries after your death, maybe not until Judgment Day, but the truth will be known. And what can we learn from people speaking badly of us? Or when we speak badly or think wrongly about others? So let's kind of break it down into two little parts here. So if you're the one who's believing negative, false things about another person, can I talk to you for a second? Before you choose to listen to a bad word about another person, remember that self-control is evidence that you are inhabited by the Holy Spirit, which means that you will channel your energy, thought life, and opinions of others with wisdom and with grace. And in reality, this is the truth. We see people and things not as they are, but as we are. It's our opinions of others that often reveal the true nature of our own hearts to ourselves. I need you to hear that today. It is our opinions of other people that often reveal the true nature of our heart. And know that it is a mark of spiritual sickness to need to judge somebody else's journey toward Christ. What I often need is more honesty about my own spirit, to recognize when this temptation to judge all y'all creeps into my heart. A deeper, more honest dive into my tendency to listen and believe negative things about others can reveal the truth that evil is powerful. And y'all, it is powerful because it doesn't just come from without. You know this to be true. It also comes from within. 1 John 4, verse 1, do not believe every evil spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God. Okay? So other group, if you're on the receiving end of others believing negative, false things about you, or, and this is sometimes more painful, when somebody's believing something negative about somebody that you really, really love. Think about this. Some of us may remember Zig Ziglar. He said, live your life in such a way that if somebody should speak badly of you, no one would believe it. This is, of course, the goal, but Mary is proof that you can still live your life that way and people will still say things. Thankfully, Jesus has advice about that. Matthew chapter 5, verse 10, God blesses those who are persecuted for doing right. The kingdom of heaven is theirs. God blesses you when people mock you, persecute you, lie about you, say all sorts of evil things about you because you're my followers. Be happy about it. Be very glad, for a great reward awaits you in heaven. And remember, the ancient prophets were persecuted in the same way. So if somebody at work, somebody in your neighborhood, somebody at school is thinking badly of you today, you could be glad because Mary Magdalene knows what it feels like. Because others know what it feels like. You are carrying on a long tradition of suffering for doing what is right. It also helps when you don't hold too tightly what other people think about you. Now, if you're a people pleaser like myself, this is a lifelong process of getting rid of it. I keep these words on my dashboard from Francis of Assisi. He said, blessed is he who expects nothing, for he shall enjoy everything. This mindset allows me to keep going when I'm rejected, when I'm misunderstood, when somebody's lying about me, when somebody's gossiping about me, because I'm not defined by others' opinion of me. So just this past week, I was talking to another Mary that many of you know, Mary Margaret Watson. And we were talking about some things before I believe they moved yesterday to Arkansas. And she was speaking about reputation and about accomplishments and opinions. She said, Jeff, if it's something that can be stripped away, if it's something that can be taken from you, then it's not your true identity. So a sport, a boyfriend, a job, a promotion, if it can be taken from you, it's not who you actually are. Think about that. Number 5, Mary stood as a witness with Jesus at the cross. In Matthew 27, it says, many women were standing there watching from a distance. They'd followed Jesus to take care of their needs. Mark chapter 15 tells the same story. There's just these little bits of information about Jesus at the cross while he was dying, and they keep getting repeated. In John chapter 19, verse 25, it says, near Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. So there's like 3 Marys out of the 4 women mentioned, right? So I want you to just slow down for a minute. I want you to not just hear those verses like you've read them 20,000 times before. I want you to like imagine the emotions of these women as they stood there and watched this happen to the kindest young man in the country. They can hear his rattled breath as he's dying, and it's 3 feet away from them. This man who's wise and joyful and who's got so much vitality and hope and who's kind to every single person he meets is dying. And these women are 2 and 3 feet away from the people responsible for the killing. And it overwhelms me when I think about that. I was thinking about John 19:25. I may have thought about this one more than anything this week. I noticed the posture of the women who were at the cross. What was happening? They were standing. Forget any images your mind may have of the women in heaps on the ground, which would have been understandable. John says that they stood. Have you ever been so moved by something that you stood? It's your body's way of saying, I'm witnessing something right here, right now. You know you've done this, right? You ever been at a close ball game? Is anybody in their seat? Have you ever been watching a game on your TV in your living room and you stand up from your couch and you go stand right by the screen and you're like, I'm so nervous. And your wife's like, what is wrong with you? I mean, this is just an example. I've never done this. You ever been at a concert when the group starts to play their one hit? Nobody's sitting down. They stand up. They can't help it, right? In the big moments, you want to stand. When my mom passed, we stood around her bed. There is solidarity in standing. There is strength in standing. There is a surge of energy in standing. These women stood as defiant witnesses, including the woman known as the Magdalene. Remember now, her name meant obstinate or rebellious. She had this stiff neck as like, you may kill this man, but he's my guy. This woman would not sit. She would not cower. She would not go hide, which, by the way, most of the guy apostles were hiding. They were. She would stand boldly on the hill of the skull with her Lord, with her Savior, for she understood that this man caused her to live her best life. She could not save him that day, but she could stand in solidarity. The Lion of Judah surrounded by the lionesses. The 6th thing is this. Mary Magdalene was a witness to Jesus' burial. Who better to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that Jesus was dead than the woman who stood at the cross? Who better to know that this wasn't an elaborate burial hoax than the woman who watched Jesus placed into the grave and had the stone rolled in front of it to close the opening? So her presence at the tomb is clearly documented in all 4 Gospels. The 7th thing is this, that Mary was a key witness of Jesus' resurrection. The gospel writers, all of them, got information of the travels and ministry, the trial, the crucifixion, the burial, and resurrection from Mary Magdalene. It seems that only John and Joseph of Arimathea represented Jesus' guy friends at the cross, but Mary was there. The burial, the chat with the angels in the empty tomb, Jesus revealing to himself to somebody in the empty tomb, all Mary, all Mary. In Mark chapter 16, verse 9, we see that when Jesus rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene. First, right? Out of whom he'd driven 7 demons. As she went and told those who'd been with him and who were mourning and weeping. And when they heard that Jesus was alive and that she had seen him, they didn't believe it. They didn't believe it. In fact, though, the list of gospels of the women involved in the last week of Jesus' life on earth, like the list of the women involved, it varies in each of the gospels. Only Mary Magdalene is mentioned by name in all 4. So clearly, everybody knew she was there. So our scripture this morning was from John chapter 20. It's unique to John. That whole story is unique to John. The other 3 gospels don't talk about it. It's important because this devoted woman had been healed by Jesus, because this sacrificial woman offered all her money to Jesus, because this courageous woman stood at the cross with Jesus, because this patient woman waited on Jesus to rise from the tomb. And so in John 20, she witnesses him alive again. I'm not going to read it all again, but it says early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. And then you skip down to verse 11, and Mary stood outside the tomb crying. She weeps, she looks around, there's angels in there, and they're like, "Why are you crying, Mary? Who are you looking for?" And they thought so Jesus asked her then, "Why are you crying? Who are you looking for?" And she thought he was the gardener. And Jesus said, "Mary." She heard at that time, right? She turned toward him and she cried out, "Rabboni." Rabboni, which means teacher. Like, you taught me how to live a life. You're the one. And then in verse 18, Mary goes on to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord." Right? So the apostles didn't believe her at first, but Mary was the ideal witness. She didn't read books about Jesus. She didn't go to classes about Jesus. She walked the dusty roads. She felt the feelings. She felt the adoration and the rejection. She heard Jesus talk to crowds. She saw his tender mercies to people in one-on-ones. She was an invaluable witness to the story of Jesus Christ, and I would say she's a lot of the reason why we sit here today to remember Jesus in July of 2023. So this witness comes from a woman who had no legal credibility, yet God chose her to share the good news for the very first time. The good news, Christ is risen. And Jesus appeared to Mary, which means, think about it, which means that he waited until Peter and John are having like this whole guy thing. They're having a race. Like, John's got to make sure, if you read it closely, that everybody knows that he beat Peter to the tomb, right? And so Jesus is like watching it all from wherever his vantage point is. And he waits until Peter and John go back to the others and say, "We don't know where he is." And once they're gone, this is crazy to me. Once they're gone, then he shows up, right? He wanted her to realize just how far she had followed him. She followed him all the way inside the tomb. All the way. And he's like, I'm going to show up for her. This is truth. God makes the incredible credible. Mary Magdalene was truly seen, completely healed, and included by Jesus, revered in early Christian communities because they knew that she had walked a mile in the shoes of the Messiah, that she was a witness to the Son of Man. So God blows me away how he repeatedly legitimizes those on the bottom, not the top. Demon-possessed people, sinners, lepers, outsiders, they're always the ones chosen by God. So the witness of Mary, when she realized that she was experiencing Jesus alive, was one word: Rabboni, teacher. In this moment, she saw that Jesus was alive, forever changed from this broken woman to revered, respected, misunderstood, but then redeemed. And then that private moment in that tomb between Jesus and Mary becomes the most public explanation of the truth of Jesus' gospel. And now Mary's words are the ones that echo through human history. I have seen the Lord risen, and he is alive. That's good news. That's good news. So, if you need this morning to take a word of encouragement from this church, we're going to stand up and sing right now. And come on down, and we'll pray for you. So let's stand and sing.